Welcome to our podcast, Raising Bigs. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about all the things families might experience in their lives and relationships, both as parents and young adults, from teens to 20-somethings, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. In this episode, we're covering the topic of overscheduled families. Sometimes it creeps up on us, and other times it's conscious choices that add up. We find ourselves with zero downtime, frantically scurrying from one calendar activity to the next. And then we wonder why we're overwhelmed and in survival mode. Take a break to think about your family's patterns with us today. Society has told us busy is better, but we have found it unbalanced and unhealthy. It comes at a cost to health and relationships. Let's chat. I'm Marcy, and I'm the mom.
I'm Kate, and I'm her kid. It's been interesting to watch myself, my siblings, and even my parents and I develop our certain patterns and tendencies and kind of correlate how busy we are with our personal goals, our personal values, what's important to us, and all that sort of stuff. Growing up, all of our schedules between us three kids looked pretty similar, but as adults, we've kind of chosen different paces at which we choose to live our lives at, faster, slower, and it also kind of changes in the phase of life that we're in. So, Mom, let's talk about what we learned growing up and how busy could be ideal, in our lives, especially with how much we had to get done, while also striking a blend of meeting our responsibilities while having fun and enjoying life and all that good stuff. So what I remember growing up as a kid is, like I said, we were always busy between my parents, the siblings, all of us. There was always something going on, always some event to go to, a practice or a performance or a show or different dinners for work or things like that. So there was always kind of something going on, at least from what I remember. And I remember, especially being the youngest kid, sometimes feeling like I didn't have as much going on as my older siblings. And I remember you and I had even had conversations about that at certain points in my life and how I kind of felt like they had kind of found their thing and they're always busy and they're running around doing this, that, and the other. And I maybe wasn't, but that was just because they were in high school and middle school. And there's a lot more activities, you're going to football games or doing this, doing that. Versus in elementary school, being the youngest, there isn't much going on. But yeah, I always remember us kids always being busy and always having something going on. And I remember with you and my dad as well, always having something going on, either between work or running us to and from practice and then coming home and cooking. And then, you maybe had a work event or, you had to stay late at work or go early in to do something. Or there were different things like that it seemed like there was always something going on in our family. I rarely, we still made time to have family dinner and stuff like that, but I rarely ever remember a time we were all just sitting around the house, not doing anything. So what did you, as a parent, how did you kind of come to that? And also, going into your adult life years ago, how did you kind of formulate how busy you were going to be?
Yeah, I don't remember as a child being nearly as busy as you guys were. And I felt like I actually restricted the number of activities that you guys were able to be involved in. I was really intentional kind of when structuring our lives as a family because I knew that your dad and I both had obligations to our workplaces, things that we had to do that sometimes involved evenings and weekends. And then you guys each had your things you were in. So whether that was, in fifth grade, I remember, band or orchestra started. And so there was concerts involved in that. And then you guys kind of morphed into choir. And so even though that was a school class, there were also social obligations outside of the school day. All three of you ended up in a competitive show choir. At times, all three of you were taking classes. We were Catholic back in the day, and you guys would go to CCD class on Wednesday nights. And so there had to be some limits. Like if you had an instrument and you had practices that were supposed to be going on and you had an extracurricular activity you were involved in, you guys tried different sports, whether that be gymnastics or softball or soccer, there had to be a limit because you also needed to get your homework done, right? Like homework was never an option in our house. It was just expected. And that could be a topic for a whole nother day on how we all made that happen. But I was very intentional about how many things you guys could each say yes to, because I was taking into account the capacity that your dad and I had to get you guys where you needed to go without driving us all crazy, right? So thank you for sharing your perspective on remembering that side of that, because I think some of what I see with my peers and my coaching clients is they just keep saying yes. And their kid might want to try 4 different things this summer. So the parent says yes to all 4, but that child might be one of 3 or one of 5. And so if you have said yes to 4 things for 5 different children, that's 20 obligations as a parent you have if it's only meeting once a week, right? And we know there's been all this push and all this pressure for kids at younger and younger ages to get involved in competitive level sports, especially, and sometimes even things like chess club and robotics and things like that. And there might be multiple nights of commitment or weekend things that they have to do. And so what I see happening is they say yes, and they're like, well, each kid's only doing 4 things. And then it's like, yeah, but you multiply that by 5. And now all of a sudden, as one parent, potentially, sometimes two, but depending on whether or not you have a partner and how able that partner is to help. And sometimes even you hear able and willing, right? Like
Mhm.
sometimes the one parent is not able because of their job, but sometimes they're just not willing to be a part of that circus, that song and dance. And, that's one thing your dad always was really good about was, we would sit down at the beginning of the week and we're like, here's the schedule of where everybody has to go. And we had a whiteboard on our refrigerator, if you remember that.
Mhm.
I had the master calendar. This was back before they had calendars and phones. But I had the master calendar, and then we would write for the week. We're like, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, all the way down, who had to go where at what time, what we were having for dinner, because there were some nights where dinner had to be something that was put in the crock pot in the morning so people could just eat as they had time in the.
Mhm.
I was also very intentional. I had heard, I don't even remember, it was probably a Dr. Phil or an Oprah show or something that said that if you are having a sit down dinner with your family 3 times a week, like that checks the box for eating family meals. I think a lot of times there's pressure on people to be like, oh, well, we have to switch our dinner time till 4 o'clock so we can get everybody to their activities, but we work until 5. Like, how is
Mhm.
that going to work? And so they default to fast food a lot of times, which goes back to our health issues, right, that we talked about in a previous episode. And so I think it is just really being intentional about how busy you can be and what that capacity looks like. So if you are a parent with younger kids, like it's a great time to start that. If you're a parent with older kids, um, especially like those late high school years, it is great once they get their license and they can drive. But it's
Mhm.
also important to remember that they do have it come at a cost if they are so highly scheduled that they're having to stay up till 1 in the morning to get their homework done or things like that. Like, yes, you want your kids to enjoy the opportunities that present themselves, but it is a good skill to learn that you kids have then been able to carry over into your adult lives, that sometimes we have to focus on meeting our obligations first and then
Mhm.
see what we have time for, capacity wise. So that's kind of the issues that I see among my peers and coaching clients. A lot of my peers right now, their kids are very close to all being out of the
Mhm.
house. And so if their kids were the center of their universe, if their whole world revolved around their kids that were in orbit, right, on the daily, all of a sudden they find themselves and they're like, oh, what's my purpose now? What's
Uh-huh.
my identity? Because everything was around my overscheduled kids. And so therefore
Mhm.
I was overscheduled. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. Kate, what are you seeing with your peers and friends? And what do you
Yeah.
that it's cost them if they are overscheduled?
Mhm. I mean, taking it back a couple years in high school with a lot of my friends, it like you said, it's just being overscheduled, and I feel like in society there's a lot of pressure to, especially when you're looking at applying for colleges or things like that. There's a lot of pressure to already have, experience and to take these AP classes or honors classes and take college credits and be involved in student council and choir and on the football team and in the chess club and, do everything, which I think to a certain point, yes, it does give you that competitive advantage, when you're looking at applying to colleges, things like that. But also, like you said, it does cost you. It drains you. You lose sleep. You lose time with family. You sometimes I notice with a lot of my friends back in high school and even in college that it's like you almost kind of, for lack of a better word, fail at what you're trying to do because you're trying to do everything. It's easy to do 2 or 3 things and do them all great, but it's hard to do 7, 8 things and do them great.
Yes.
So I think I saw a lot of times it's like they, were had to miss this choir show because they had to go to the football game and then, had to come home from the football game and didn't get their homework done and then had to stay in after school detention to get the homework done. And then they missed choir practice again. And it just like, it all kind of cycled back to each other. So I think that that's where it's important, like you said, as a parent to kind of not necessarily limit your kid as what they can do, because I think it's important to allow kids to explore and figure out, what they are and aren't into, but it's important to just recognize how much they're taking on and acknowledge that at some point you kind of have to pick and choose And again, I saw a lot of my friends do that in high school and college and even now in adult life. Say, you know what, I really like football, but I don't have the time for it. Or I really like chess club, but I don't have the time for it. Or things like that. So I think you do have to make sacrifices and kind of prioritize either what you enjoy the most or what is going to get you the most success. Again, looking at like applying to colleges, stuff like that. What's going to weigh the most? Are your grades more important, or is being a part of every single club and team more important? So I think that that's something really important. And now in my adult life, I see a lot of my friends. I think some people have still kind of carried over that busy mindset, whether it's in college and then, taking on internships and still being involved in all these organizations and things like that, or even post college, working a full time job and then, just due to the economy, working a part time job on the weekends and then trying to raise a dog and trying to still have, time with your friends and your family. I think just as a society overall, people are generally try to be too busy. And I will admit I'm, a proponent in that. I find myself too busy sometimes, but it, like you said, it does just cost you your peace, and it after a while I think does kind of weigh on you and weighs you down. But that's what I would say I'm seeing with people over the past couple of years in my age range.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The messaging that comes from society a lot of times, whether that's pressures to apply for colleges or things to put on your resume to give you that leg up when you're looking for your first professional job, those types of things. Like, yeah, it does look great if you were involved in a lot of things, but it does raise a question in my mind, especially in the past when I've been a hiring manager. It's like, how were you possibly getting all of that done to the best of your ability? And I want to know that I have a young professional that has the ability to balance real life with
Mm-hmm.
their professional accomplishments, and where they see the value in self-love and spending time on themselves, and that their self-worth isn't tied up in everything. And we'll talk a little bit more about that kind of as we go along. As you guys have all graduated from college and found yourselves all of a sudden having more free time on your hands potentially than you did when
Mm-hmm.
you were in college, you guys all had a little bit different paths, right? Like you were working full time, going to online school full time, both things online. Your sister
Mm-hmm.
was working part time, a live job, right? And even through the pandemic, where she was an essential worker. So she had to be physically at work and going to school during that time. And your older brother, when he was in his undergrad, he was very, very involved at the campus level in a lot of different fronts. And then went on to get his master's and was doing a GA-ship. But when he actually got to the point where he only had his professional job to worry about, there was almost like an identity shift that had to happen there. So it's been really fun for me as a parent to watch you guys kind of all find your groove. And it's so unique to each human. Like, you enjoy having things that you're working towards. You enjoy having, let's say, a training schedule for the marathon you're running in the fall,
Mm-hmm.
things to look forward to, things to work toward. You require less just hanging out time than,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, your sister does, right? And you are less likely to get yourself in a situation where your calendar is booked full for 7 days in a row than, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
your brother is, right? Like, and so everybody's pace is different. Everybody's jive is different, like what they thrive in, and also how they regain their power. Like, I knew when your sister was a little kid that if she went to her room, it was because she needed some quiet alone time. She still,
Mm-hmm.
as an adult, needs that quiet alone time. It's the way she's wired. You might want to go out for a run. Sawyer might want to hang
Mm-hmm.
out with friends. Like, there's all kinds of different ways that people regain their power too. So I think it's important as a parent to remember that each of your kids and their capacity for busy is going to be different. Do you have anything to say about that unique piece for each?
Yeah, I think just as a child, and especially like as you're getting into your 20s and even your 30s, especially with social media and things like that, it's easy to look around and see, oh, this person is super involved and is, working full time and is in getting their masters and, on all these different boards and things like that. And it's easy to kind of look at that and compare, but that's what works for them. They might, that's just what works for them. But I think it's also important to recognize the things that you don't see. If you're someone who is spending time with your family or your friends is super important to you, that super busy person probably is only seeing their family, on holidays or things like that. So I think, like you said, it's just important to recognize that it's unique to each person and not to compare yourself, because we all have the same 24 hours in the day, but we all spend that 24 hours differently. And, if I just had a day where I didn't have anything on my schedule and I wasn't working and didn't have anything to get done and everything was clean and all that stuff, I would be miserable. That'd be the worst day of my life. I don't like having a day where I just don't do anything. But I have a lot of friends, a lot of just know of a lot of people who that's like their dream day is just like some people I know will spend Monday through Saturday working and cleaning their house and meal prepping and everything. So that way, when it comes to Sunday, they can just sit and not do anything and watch TV, or if they want to go for a walk or whatever they want to do. That I wouldn't like that. So I think that it's just important to recognize, like you said, what works for you, what's important to you, and what you value. And I think that that's also why it's important to set realistic expectations in your life, whether that is as a parent with your kid or just setting expectations for yourself. You kind of touched on that earlier when you talked about, looking at, okay, who is going to get the kids to which places, and how many activities can they be involved in, because like you said, if you say 4 activities for 5 kids, that's 20 different commitments right there. And that's just not, for most people, not a realistic expectation to be able to get your kids to and from that, or as a child to be able to do all of that. So I think that it's important to set realistic expectations about what you can and can't do, and also what you enjoy doing. It's okay to enjoy just sitting down and not doing anything, and it's also okay to enjoy being super busy and not having a lot of free time.
Yeah. And it's just really being conscious, right? About what are the extras that you are saying yes to, that you are piling on top of things that have to happen, right? In an ideal world, we all would understand and realize that we have to take care of our health, because if we don't take care of our health, none of the rest of it is going to happen. None of it's going to matter long term, right? But for many of us, what is it we sacrifice to add on top 2 or 3 things that we would like to accomplish or do? It's our health, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or relationships with family, things like that. And again, what's important to certain people, like there are some people who truly, whether because their family was dysfunctional or they have a family by choice that they're spending time with a friend group instead,
Mm-hmm.
truly don't thrive spending an extended amount of time with their family. And that's great that they have recognized that for themselves. Their parents won't always recognize that as
Mm-hmm.
it being great, but sometimes for them, that is the right choice. So, the realistic expectations, knowing what it is that's already on your plate, you know, if you have a full-time job and you work 8 to 5, you need to be there 8 to 5. So don't take on a commitment that's going to pull you into something at 10 o'clock every day. If that's
Mm-hmm.
not going to work, if your job is not flexible. And again, it's just really being realistic. What am I going to feel like when I get home at 5 o'clock at night? And not understanding that, like, you can't discount, I have to get dinner on the table for my kids, or you can't discount, okay, we've got to check in the homework that's coming in, make sure everything's signed and the backpacks are done for tomorrow. And
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we forget about those daily operational things that need to happen and we just dismiss them, but then that's the stuff that's keeping us up late, which then leaves us with too little sleep, sacrificing our health, and the next morning we wake up and we're burnt out and over.
Mm-hmm.
So, same with kids your age who want to go out and they want to have fun with their friends and they want to party, but they're doing so on a Wednesday or Thursday night, and 8 o'clock tomorrow morning still comes. And
Mm-hmm.
you're still expected by your employer to be able to execute your job. And so I think it's just really finding that balance, but it takes intentionality about what those realistic expectations are that you can handle. I think there's a yardstick out there and people think, well, everybody should be able to operate at a certain level. And there are people who can really strive and push hard and thrive and don't necessarily need as much downtime as others. But I think we've done a disservice as a society to not value also those people who are recognizing their limits, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about the person who says, I don't want to do anything on Sundays. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that
Yeah.
they're not thriving and striving in other areas of their life. It just means that, they need to do so in a different way in order to have it work for them. Now, the person who's in their
Mm-hmm.
parents' basement playing video games all those hours, there may be other things that they need to address, or need to look at, or there might be legit reasons why that's how they're functioning in the world. And that's at this point, not the person we're talking about in this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are putting pressure on themselves and expect themselves to be able to operate up here all the time, and they don't understand why they're feeling depleted and exhausted and overwhelmed,
Mm-hmm.
right?
For sure.
So that unscheduled downtime, right? That even might look different for people. It is necessary no matter what capacity it looks like. Like for me, I am not going to lay in bed more than 8 hours a day. Usually it's closer to 6 or 7 because if I'm not
Hmm.
sleeping, I'm out of bed. Like I'm not that person that
Hmm.
just lounge around. But you will find me on the couch or out in an Adirondack chair outside reading a book. Like that is
Hmm.
chosen downtime or taking a walk or, potentially working on a craft project. I used to scrapbook all the time and that was like
Hmm.
my outlet. What would you say, Cade, that some of your what would you consider your unscheduled downtime and
Yeah.
what activities you're choosing during those times?
For sure. I think just to start, I think a lot of times when people hear downtime or say downtime, they assume sitting and watching TV or laying in bed or sitting on the couch taking a nap. And that is it. And if that is what you consider downtime, great. That's cool that that works for you. But I think downtime looks different for everyone. Like you said, downtime could be going for a walk. Downtime could be going and hanging out with your friends. Sometimes I think of downtime more as just more like free time
Mhm.
than anything. I don't think you necessarily need to be relaxing or, I think that that is still equally as important. But I think just that having that free time and saying, okay, got off work, what do I want to do today? That could be, I'm going to go to dinner with friends. I'm going to go to dinner by myself. I'm going to sit at home and watch a movie. I'm going to take my dog on a walk. So I think that that's one thing that's really important to recognize is that downtime looks different for everyone. And you can spend your downtime doing something
Mhm.
if that makes sense. Your downtime doesn't have to be just sitting down. So, I like to spend my downtime walking the dogs or playing them out in the backyard or cooking or baking something. Going for a walk or a run is even downtime for me. Sometimes just cleaning up my room or the house. Yes, is that technically, putting in work? Is that doing something? Yes. But to me, it's downtime. If I let's say get off work early for some reason, or I was supposed to go out to breakfast with some friends on Saturday and then it got canceled. I'm just not the type of person that then is going to say, okay, I want to sit on the couch with my Saturday morning and chill out. My then would be, okay, I have this free time now. I'm going to clean or I'm going to walk the dogs or I'm going to do whatever. So I think that that's something that for me is really important to acknowledge that downtime doesn't have to look the same for everyone. And it's important to figure out what that downtime looks like for you and what brings you peace.
Yeah, it's just having that white space in your calendar where you actually have the freedom to decide how you spend that time. I know if I get an invitation to go do something like on a weeknight, one of the first things I do, yes, I'm a nerd, I still have a paper calendar. I open up my calendar and I'm like, oh, look, there's already 2 nights next week where I've got obligations that I've committed to. And I'm not the type of person to commit to something and then cancel out at the last minute. That's just not the way I operate. So
Hmm.
I would rather say no up front and not commit to thing number 3 and then regret that I have just taken away some of the very little white space that I might have in my calendar for that week. So it's the freedom to decide what to do with your white space
For
and to
sure.
protect your white space, even if that's just a sliver every day. Like I've had so many people say to me, I can't find any white space. And I'm like, yes, you can. Everybody has the same 24 hours. It's about prioritizing
Hmm.
what you're putting there.
Well, and I think in that just emphasizes the importance to me of I think a lot of people emphasize the importance of saying no, but I think equally as important is the importance of saying yes. Like you said, if your week coming up is super busy and it's Tuesday and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you have something and someone asks you to do something on Tuesday, it's okay to say no and say, what, even though I technically have this, free time, this open time, I know the rest of the week is going to be super busy. And whether that's saying no to hanging out with friends or saying no to going and, seeing your family, whatever it is, I think it's important to say no, but also important to say yes. If you are a person who feels like, maybe you wish you were getting out there more and you wish you had more going on, I think it's easy to get in the habit of saying no because you're just so used to having all that downtime. But again, it just goes with the intentionality of saying, okay, I want to spend more time with my family or I want to spend more time with my friends. So when they do ask, I'm going to say yes. Or when work asks me to stay late and, start a new project, I'm really looking to advance in my career. So I'm going to say yes to that, even though it means I'm going to work more hours. So it's really just finding what works for you and not being afraid to say yes or no.
And it's okay to say yes to yourself, right? It's
Hmm.
100% okay to say yes to yourself. And so when you're saying no to something else, you are saying yes to yourself and to your own priorities. So that's a great point, Kate. I think, again, we've talked about how society has set the bar fairly high, especially I think for high schoolers and college age kids. Like the expectation levels there are just way different than they were even just one generation ago. But I think it's really important. And I've tried to stress this with you guys, and you can tell me if you remember any of that. But like, you are not what you accomplish. So I know
Hmm.
that there are people who are very much tied into the letters behind their name. They're tied into the paycheck that they get. They're tied into the car they drive, the neighborhood they live in. Like those things are what they find their worth in. And I've worked really hard to get you guys to understand that that doesn't have anything to do with your worth. Those are
Hmm.
things you do, but that's not who you are. So, while it is great to accomplish things, it's very rewarding, right? It's fun to be in pursuit of something and then to realize that dream because of the action steps that you've taken, but you're not necessarily what you accomplish. And I think that's important for parents to understand too. And a lot of times parents go one step farther and they adopt this I am what my kids accomplish,
Hmm.
because they've done all the driving to the events, they've paid all the fees to have their kids in all of these things. And so it's funny, you'll be sitting in a meeting of all adults who have kids and it's like, who are you and what do you do, and they list off their kids accomplishments.
Hmm.
It's like, wow, as a society have we really put that much importance on you are what your children have accomplished, or you are what you have accomplished? And I don't know how your generation, Cade, maybe views that differently.
Hmm.
Gen X, you're part of Gen Z, is might view that differently than maybe we were raised.
I think I think, and again, this is not all encompassing. This is just kind of a general statement. But I think overall, my generation, Gen Z, some younger millennials, I think they put even more of an emphasis on you are what you accomplish or you are what you have. Again, especially in the age of social media, when someone posts they got a new car, moved into a new house, or got this new degree, you get all those comments of, oh, congratulations on graduating, blah, blah, blah. So you do get that sense of accomplishment and that fulfillment from that, which I think is important. I don't think that, you've worked hard to buy that car or buy that house or get the new job or the degree or whatever, not denying that, not trying to downplay that. But I think just the key difference in that is the part of tying it to your worth. We're saying, oh, I got this good job and so I'm successful and I'm a great person and everything like that. And I'm where I want to be in life. Because at the end of the day, that's really not the most important thing. Or, oh, I got this degree, so that's, what what I have. And I think that for me, the difference between something that I'm accomplishing is something I'm proud of versus who I am and what what I am as a person is how long is it lasting? Once you put in that work to get that degree, you get that degree and then you're done. Or once you buy that car, you drive it, it dies, and then you get another one. And so I think that versus saying, okay, you know, I am really intentional at spending time with my family, and I know that I'm a great sibling and a great son and a great parent, and blah blah blah. That to me is that's lasting a lifetime. So I think that is the difference of is it who you are or what you've accomplished, and they don't match up. Just because you can accomplish a lot and still
A
not
good
be who you
person.
want to be, and you can also not accomplish anything but be exactly who you want to be and be where you want to be in life. So I think that's an important difference there.
Do you think your generation respects people's ability to make a choice? I know it seems like comparison is higher because of social
Mm-hmm.
media, like you're comparing yourself to other people at your age. But like if there's someone who's your age who doesn't have a college degree, is not working a full-time job, is not getting ready to move to the big city, like doesn't have their own
Mm-hmm.
car, those things, right? The accomplishments you've had. But if you have a friend who likes to hike mountains and they don't own a single thing on this planet because they value
Mm-hmm.
their freedom and being able to hike in the mountains, like where does the comparison fit in there with the Gen Zers?
I feel like it's again, it definitely depends on the person, but I feel like a lot of people from our generation, it's almost kind of two-sided. Like you said, you have those people that, really prioritize having fun and spending time with their life and traveling to new places and they don't care about what they have or where they live and they'll sleep on a friend's couch just, traveling the world. And I think that those people all kind of almost group together and support each other. And then I think the people, like you said, who get the degree and move to the big city and start the big corporate job all kind of grouped together. I do think there definitely is crossover, not saying that that's not a thing or saying that, one side doesn't support the other. But just from what I've seen, I think a lot of times people separate it and can kind of appreciate both sides, but don't are okay with not having that. I think a lot of like the people who started started the jobs and have, the nice high-rise apartment or whatever, say, oh, I'm glad that they found, what works for them, but that's not how I want to spend my life. So I think that that is something that my generation has done, which I think is a good thing, because it's almost kind of that, like, I see what you're doing and I love what you're doing. It's just not for me, but I'm not taking away what you've done or your accomplishments.
And I actually find that fascinating because I don't feel like that's the way it was when I was your age. Like it was very much
Mm-hmm.
the path you're supposed to follow. And not to the extent that it was for my parents, but I at least was like, okay, I was first gen going to get a college degree, right? And the discussion was, what do you want to major in? Pick something you like. And then the discussion
Mm-hmm.
I had with you guys is, that's great if you want to go to college. What do you want your life to look like?
Mm-hmm.
Because that was just a mindset shift that had happened during my generation. Because if you are someone who wants to work 3 12s and be done for the week because you value your free time, those were discussions that didn't happen when I was in
Mm-hmm.
school. And so I love that people are looking at now and they're like, oh, do you want to go travel Europe for the first year after you're out of high school? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it would have been earth shattering if any of my friends had decided to do that, right?
Yeah.
Or because we all picked up and went off to college. That's what we did. That was what was
Mm-hmm.
expected. That's what we chose to do. Like we could have bucked the system and said no, but we just didn't. And
Yeah.
now I feel like, there's no apology coming back on behalf of those people who feel like they might be bucking the system. And I'm even seeing that transfer over now to people of my generation. There's a guy I follow on TikTok who I find fascinating, and he lives on a little tiny island off the coast of Honduras. And he was a, multiple six-figure earner in Arizona, living the American dream, when he took this vacation to Honduras and decided he didn't want to be part of the rat race anymore. And so he
Mm-hmm.
actually moved as an expat to this little island. And I'm like, there are not that many people of my generation that are willing in their 50s to step off of the treadmill, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and do things that people your generation are willing to do at the age of 17.
Yeah.
Like it's just a completely different mindset. So I love the freedom of that. And that goes back to knowing your capacity, knowing what drives you, knowing what
Mm-hmm.
is important to you. And I think, when we look at parents, like for parents, if you've had kids, like you have a certain responsibility to those kids, right? And a certain responsibility to others if you've taken on a job working for a corporation or
Mm-hmm.
for a nonprofit or whatever that might look like. There's obligations you have to other people, but then there are also obligations you have to yourself. And I think that gets lost, especially on the parent side of the equation, a lot of times, because sometimes I think parents give and they give and they give and they give and they give, and they will make anything happen for their kids, even after their kids have aged out of the legal age of parents being responsible for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they give at the sacrifice, right, of making sure their own health is taken care of making sure they have their own interests, of making sure they are happy, and that they're going to be well adjusted, and so it's finding that blend or that balance. I'm sure you remember times when you were young and a Sunday would roll around during football season and you wanted to do something, and I'm like, I'm going scrapbooking with my friends. Like
Mm-hmm.
that was what I did to keep my balance, right? And so I did not, because you're my child and you were asking for something, did not feel like I had to abandon what I wanted to do or what my balance was, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to make yet another thing happen for my kids. And I think that's something that some parents need some extra support, encouragement, assistance to
Mm-hmm.
learn that you are not under any obligation beyond a certain point, right? To do all of these things for your kids. And kids are scrappy and they're resilient and they will figure out ways to make things happen, or they will rebound, right? If there's things
Mm-hmm.
you've been disappointed about. So I think even as a young adult, right? Like you probably have people you feel responsible to, and then you also
Mm-hmm.
responsible for yourself. So how do you strike kind of a blend in that arena?
For sure. I think it's just important to prioritize putting yourself first, and not in a selfish way, but in a way that if I'm not taken care of, if I'm not okay, whether that's mentally, physically, whatever, I can't be there for the other people that depend on me. If I am overworked and drained, I can't then, help, other people out that need it. If I feel like I'm just not in a good place mentally, or my physical health is struggling, I can't be there for the people that need it. So I think that it's important to just to recognize just as much of importance as it is to be there for other people, you can't be there for other people if you yourself are not in a good place.
Yeah. And I think, self-love, which is kind of what I equate that to in the coaching world, right? Is really taking care of yourself first so that you can love other people. It's exactly what you talked about. And we can't give from an empty bucket. So, yes, we have responsibilities to other people, but our responsibility first and foremost in order to be able to deliver on those promises is to take care of ourselves, right? We've
Hmm.
been given this one life. That's all we get. Here in this body, in this realm. And so it's our responsibility first to take care of that. And if we are constantly running around in a state of survival, right, then our cortisol levels are up, our blood pressure is up, we're probably not eating healthy, we're probably not getting enough exercise. I lived that life for quite a while until I started to figure out that it didn't have to be that way. I still know
Hmm.
a lot of people that are living that life. And so, how would you, if you had to describe surviving versus thriving as a young adult, how would you describe that?
Hmm. I would describe it as just whether or not you feel fulfilled versus feeling like it's a requirement. If you're doing all these things and you're involved and you have this full-time job and have all these extra responsibilities, there are people who thrive with all of that and they feel fulfilled by checking all these things off and getting all this done and being involved and helping everyone out. And there are people who do that, but do it because they feel like they have to. And I think that that is the difference of surviving versus thriving is how do you feel about it? Do you feel like you're fulfilled? Do you feel like your needs are being met, or do you feel like you're doing it just so that way you can keep up and so you can either satisfy what you think you should be doing or what your parents think you should be doing or what society thinks you should be doing? I would say that that is the difference for me, is just how do you feel about it? Do you feel fulfilled or do you feel like you're doing it because it's a requirement?
Yeah, and for me, surviving is just going through the motions. You're getting up and it's like Groundhog Day, right? It's the same thing
Hmm.
over and over again. And like you said, there's not purpose or passion behind what you're doing it. You're doing things because you feel like you have to. If you're thriving, you've made choices that take the things you value and put them in alignment with your actions, right? And so you're going to thrive, even if you're, let's say you currently are volunteering for 5 things, but 3 of them you really don't care about. Like being able to gracefully back out of those situations without worrying about what everybody else is thinking of you, and actually choosing to put your time and talents and treasures into things that do make you feel purposeful, right? Or are things you
Hmm.
really care about the outcomes for, that is going to bring you back into alignment with your values. And that's where you're going to thrive. If you're just checking
Hmm.
off boxes every day, that's survival mode. And that, in my estimation, is not living, right? That you're never going to be on your deathbed and be like, oh, I wish I had volunteered for one more classroom party mom shift. Like that's not going to happen, which my
Hmm.
all of my kids know that I would have much rather gone on a field trip than volunteered for
Uh-huh.
a party. That was like the death of me. I did it a few times, but I hated every minute of it. So I should have said no in those instances.
Hmm.
Or can I be the one to drop off the fruit tray or whatever that might have been, instead of physically being there in the mayhem
Hmm.
of the classroom and having to deal with kids all hopped up on sugar. So it's really, if you want to be thriving, it's looking at what are your values and how do you bring the things you're saying yes to in alignment with the capacity that you have to do that, and then with your own values. And so when I think about that, I think about balance versus blend. Like we have heard for years, work-life balance, right?
Hmm.
There's no such thing as balance. It will never be where life is exactly a 50-50 split. You do hear like joy and sorrow, the negative and the positive emotions, like life is 50-50. Like it might be 60-40 sometimes. It might be 70-30 sometimes.
Hmm.
Overall, it maybe is a 50-50 split. Half the time, some things suck that happen in life. And if we go around expecting to be happy 100% of the time, we're setting ourselves up for failure. But it's how we deal with the tough stuff, right? That
Hmm.
determines how long we stay here and sit and suffer unnecessarily, and how quickly we're able to shift back into those higher vibe emotions, right? So if we want to find a blend rather than a balance, if we're seeking a perfect balance, that's not going to happen. But if we try to find a blend where life and extracurriculars and school obligations or work obligations and family and our own personal downtime are all in harmony, with each other, right? It's going to look
Hmm.
different on different weeks. So there were times when I was working for a very large nonprofit, if we had special events going or we were extremely short on staff or things like that, where work required a significantly higher portion of my time and energy that particular week than it might on an average week, right?
Hmm.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that being occasional. It's when things shift to where 70% of your time and energy is constantly being required by your employer or by what you've got yourself roped into during your college education or whatever that might be, right? Your
Hmm.
extracurricular activities. When things get off kilter and there is no blend and it feels like all of those pieces are constantly competing for your time and attention and you don't feel at peace with that, that's when your blend is off, right? And you need
Hmm.
to look at that. So, I would love it if we would be able to just get rid of the word balance because I think that does set us up for an expectation that is not attainable.
I
Because
agree.
if
I
you
think
got
it
sick
sets
kids,
up
you got to stay home with the sick kids. Like work's
exactly.
going to get the best of you that week. So,
When I think, like you said, it's not about balance because balance means that it's equal on both sides, and that's just not the way life is. Whether that's work in life, whether that's your kids and your job, whether whatever it is, it's never going to be equal. But it's figuring out kind of almost kind of like if you look at it as a pie chart of figuring, okay, work is taking up 40% of the pie chart. My kids are taking up 25%. My relationship is taking up 20%. And kind of figuring out what that blend looks like for you and how you can find harmony in all of the things because there are things that we have to do. If you have kids, you have to make sure they're taken care of. You have to take them to the practices that they're involved in. You have to go to work. You have to if you're in a relationship, give that time and energy. You have to take care of yourself. There's a lot of things that we have to do. You can't just say, okay, I want my kids to be removed from this piece
yeah.
of the pie, or I want work to be removed from this piece of the pie. So I think that it's important to look at those things that you have to do and figuring out that blend that works for you.
Yeah, and we always have choices, right? We may not like the consequences of our choices, but we always have the freedom to make a choice, whether that looks like getting a different job or backing out of some other commitments. Um, just because we said yes to something 2 years ago does not mean we still have to say yes today. Life is going to
Mm-hmm.
change and shift. And like as I've seen like people in my age group, let's look at the dating realm. So they may have been married for a really long time. They may
Mm-hmm.
have gotten a divorce. All of a sudden they find themselves single. They may have more time to spend with, let's say, their girlfriends. Let's say it's a woman, has more time to spend with her girlfriends, hanging out, doing things. A lot of times those girlfriends that they're hanging out with are also single, right? And so there's an identity piece there. We identify as a group of single women. We are out doing certain things, right? Then someone meets someone, right? And
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden their priorities might shift a little bit and they might have to change the blend of what's going on in their life. And our ability to do that is really important. And our ability to accept the fact that just because things operated one way doesn't mean they're always going to be that way or that that's what's always going to be important to you. Your priorities, your values, your identity is going to shift. So your identity is not what you do. And I think when you ask people, well, who are you? And if you say, pick on my dad, he was the president of a bank. I am the president of the bank, right? If that's what he said, that's who my dad is. That's what my
Mm-hmm.
dad did. But then he retired. And if that was his whole identity of who he is, then when he retires, all of a sudden he's not going to know who he is or what to do with himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so your identity is not what you do because things change. Your identity might have been as the mom who volunteered in the classroom all the time, but then when your child gets to middle school and they don't need that anymore, and so now all of a sudden you're not on the PTA and you're not volunteering for field trips and classroom parties and you're not doing stuff for the elementary teacher. Who are you?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important to pursue your identity over what it is that you do and you're committed to because those things can shift and
I
change.
agree. And I think that it's important to find, like you said, who you are and not what you do, whether that's taking care of your kids or your job or your accomplishments, kind of like we talked about earlier, and really focus on who you are and who you are. You are a parent or you are, the president of the bank in the situation you gave. Like that is something you do, but that's not who you are. And I think that it's important too to recognize what environment you're in when asked that question. Obviously, if you're at a working event, you're going to talk more heavily about work. if you're hanging out with friends, work maybe shouldn't be the, highest topic of discussion. So I think that that's important too, is figuring out where you're at and who's asking the question and what parts of you are important in that moment.
And you get to choose what parts of you want people to see in those situations as well. Like you talked about, you're someone who's wanting to advance in your career. So what you might say in that networking situation might be different than someone who is, not working in the financial industry, but who is working in a very relational business. Like I know a lot of the relationships I've carried with me from past jobs are people that really the things they knew about me were not so much what I did. It was about who I am as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we've stayed in contact. But I tend to focus more on relational types of situations because that's how I'm wired, right? That's who I,
Mm-hmm.
and neither thing is more valuable than the other. And so I love that you're assessing kind of the situation you find yourself in, or even like what you hope to gain. If it's a networking situation, like you may be wanting to advance your identity in this little piece of, and it's maybe not even I'm the bank
Mm-hmm.
president, but it's like I am a professional in a highly competitive industry and I choose to strive to advance myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's more about who you're becoming than a title behind your name. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're in your late teens or early 20s, like you're just figuring out your identity and figuring out who you are in the world and what that looks like and what things are important to you, because you're out from under your parents' ideas, values,
Mm-hmm.
society's ideas, but you get to make a lot of decisions for yourself that you've maybe never made before. I encourage parents all the time. I'm like, let your kids make what are considered big decisions, right, in their lives at very young ages, because you want them to learn how to do that in the safety of your household with your guidance, rather than having the first decision of, oh, do I go to that party where there's going to be alcohol, be when they're a freshman on a college campus and
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to make those decisions and they don't know how to manage that because they've never been given the opportunity. So, developing that identity can start, and those conversations can start, at a younger age, even
Mm-hmm.
the age that we kind of target to talk about here on this podcast.
For sure. And I think that it's important to recognize what brings you joy and fulfillment. Um, like we kind of talked about earlier, just you have to have a job, to pay your bills, to, live life. But that might not be what brings you joy. And that's okay. Obviously, in an ideal world, yes, we would be working a job that brings us joy and fulfillment, but that's not the case for everyone. And that might not be the case for where you're at in life right now. Maybe in the future you will, or in the past you had a job that brought you joy and fulfillment. So if you are in the case where that job doesn't bring you joy and fulfillment, then don't prioritize that. Don't prioritize that being your personality and that being tied to your accomplishments. If your joy and fulfillment comes from volunteering, then let that be that, or taking care of your dogs or your kids or your parents or whatever the situation is. Recognize that. And if you are able to, give those pieces that bring you joy and fulfillment a little bit more of that pie slice that I was kind of talking about. Excuse me, like I said, you have to work, but if work is not what is making you happy right now, or it's bringing you a lot of stress, or it's just very intense season at your job, it's okay to recognize, okay, I'm going to go and clock in from 8 to 5, and then I'm tuning that out and I'm not giving it any more of my time. And I want to work on the things that give me more joy and fulfillment. So I think that that is something that's really important to prioritize.
Yeah, for sure. That's what's paying your bills, but that's not necessarily what your purpose is or what you take pride in. And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. I think that's a really good point, that that is one of our biggest commitments, is how we pay our bills in this country, right? Like we live in
Mm-hmm.
a capitalist society. That's the way it's set up. But it doesn't define who you are. And so, yes, work eats up a lot of our time, but if we are able to find purpose, whether that's at work or find purpose in the volunteer things we do or the way we've structured our lives, I think that's great. So, but being fulfilled is, at the end of the day, right, what we're all after. Life should be joyful, and we're not meant to be sitting around feeling sorry for ourselves 24/7, 365. That, in my estimation, is no way to live. So I'm going to do everything in my power, and I hope as a parent you feel like I did everything in my power to encourage you guys to find that joy and fulfillment in what
For
it is
sure.
you're pursuing, because everybody has the capability to do that. It's a mindset shift that you give yourself permission to do what it takes to get your life to a point where you feel like you're thriving and not
Mm-hmm.
just surviving, right? So any
For
advice,
sure.
Kate, you'd give to others that are out there listening, especially the young adults, when it comes to finding a pace that is ideal for them?
I would say just spend time really figuring out what works for you and what you enjoy doing. Again, it's okay to be the person that is super busy and has a lot going on. That's not a bad thing. That's not, your priorities in life might be different than the person who wants to just go to work and then spend the rest of their time relaxing or being with their kids or with their dogs or whatever the case may be. So I think that it's important just to figure out what works for you. And I think in order to do that, you really need to sit down and think about what brings you joy and fulfillment and how do you want to spend your time. And again, you have those requirements of things that you have to do. You have to, go to work for a certain amount of hours. You might have to spend a certain amount of time on school, or you might have to spend a certain amount of time taking care of your kids or your parents. But I think outside of that, things that you have to do is really just figuring out what works for you. Do you want to be the person who's busy all the time? Do you want to be the person who has a bunch of free time? Do you want to find a happy medium where, maybe a couple days a week you've got things going on and another couple days you've got nothing? I think that's just important to figure out what kind of weigh your options, figure out what works for you. But mom, as a parent, how do you find, that balance? And then how do you help your kids find that balance as well?
Yeah, I think, I'll circle back to the intentionality piece. Like, there are, especially like right now, there's a lot of parents working multiple jobs and trying to keep their families afloat, both financially and operationally. And so their window might be very small of where they can find some time, right, to take care of themselves or things that fill their soul. But there's little tiny things you can do. So like one of the very first things I started doing during the busiest times of my life is when I had to commute, I started listening to personal growth podcasts. And so that was time I was captive in the car. I could have been sitting in silence, which some days I did. Some days I still do that when I'm in the car if I just need to clear my head. But capturing that time and being able to focus on something that I'm wanting to grow on was a really great way for me to take some white space. I was in the car traveling to something that I had to do, right? But I was able to capitalize on that time and spend it doing something that I really, really loved, which has now morphed into something I do for work, right? Like I
Hmm.
coach other people on how to figure out what's not working for them, where they're stuck, and how to align their life with their values. And so I think when it comes to your kids too, like helping them decide, okay, there might be these 4 things you'd like to try this year, back to the summer example. We can't have all 4 of them running consecutively. So what if we try these 2 this summer and we put one on the docket for fall and one on the docket for winter and try to spread things out a little bit? Not saying you can't ever try those things, but that we can't try them all at once, because I think, again, those are important lessons for kids to learn. We have capacity, right? Kids have capacity. If you are not structuring in time for your kid to just be a kid, there's a problem. Like children nowadays, a lot of them don't know how to entertain themselves. Like unless they have a tablet in front of their face or you are entertaining them, they don't know what to do with that white time and or white space. And so I think it's really important not only to teach them how to fill that time, but how to fill it in a way that makes them happy. Is it drawing that makes them happy? Is it taking their dogs outside and playing fetch with them? What is it that makes them happy? And
Hmm.
boredom is okay. And I think sometimes we forget that as parents. We think we've got to have our kids so heavily scheduled, and then we're questioning, why are we seeing meltdowns at dinner time? Why are we seeing behavior issues? I also think picking what is non-negotiable. Like we always had big breakfast on Sunday morning. That was a thing we always did. And that was one meal I knew for sure out of those 3 in a week that we were going to get. And then I had to be intentional about when those others were that were going to fit in. And it takes
Hmm.
planning and it takes intentionality, but for a family to be able to not only meet the needs of the collective, right? Like if you want the whole family to eat together, that's great. But each member of that family has their own needs too. Much like supervising a team at work, each person has their own things that they're striving for that make them tick. And so as a leader, right, which you are as a parent, it falls to you to figure out how to help them meet their needs, but then also to get the needs of the collective met. So while not losing yourself, right? Because you're not a good leader if you lose yourself in the process. So, finding your sweet spot, checking in with yourself routinely, like get in a habit every Sunday night, look at your calendar. You might want to look a couple weeks out so you know what's coming up. And it's okay to block off time on your calendar and write white space and act like that's an appointment with yourself that you are holding for yourself. And so those are just some of the ways. Teach kids how to do it. so that they have time
Hmm.
to learn how to prioritize, teach your kids how to prioritize what is truly important to them, because it will lead to much saner weeks where you don't feel like you're constantly chasing your tail. Set up systems in your family. So if you've got kids that are going to dance or soccer or hockey or whatever that might be, make sure those bags are packed and ready to go by the door the night before. Make sure those
Hmm.
lunch boxes, get packed. Now, does that have to be the parent packing the lunch boxes? No. I mean, Cade was packing his lunchbox at the age of 4. Like, he knew
Hmm.
exactly what he needed to do, and, Cade's done his own laundry since 1st grade. If your kids can, let them, and so as a parent, what did that free me up to do? It freed me up to follow one of my passions, which fueled my bucket, which was on Sundays, rather than standing and doing laundry all day, I was able to go scrapbooking with my friends. So,
Hmm.
there are solutions and ways to make this all work and to teach your kids to do the same for yourself. If your kid's calling you from college and they're like, "I'm overwhelmed," when was the last time you were outside and got some sun and took a walk? And teach them some of those things that they in the moment can't come up with themselves.
Hmm.
They're so buried by all of the expectations that either society's putting on them or they're putting on themselves. So the sweet spot changes. It's a moving target. So
Hmm.
just know that going in, and be willing to reassess and to make changes as you need to. So everybody has their own right pace. You just need to get to know and learn your capacity, your family's capacity, and find the pace where you are happy and you are at peace. It is very unique. It is unique to your family. It is unique to you. So nobody has to give you permission to do this. You have agency over your own life to do these things. So there's going to be times in life when your foot is on the gas, right? And you've got to be pedal to the metal because there are responsibilities you need to meet. There's going to be other times where you're just coasting and you're riding those brakes. And both states of being are ideal sometimes, and they have their purpose. And so if you're not in alignment and you're feeling discontent, know that you got to do some switching up. You got to find a way to check in with yourself. How busy am I? And remember, it's within my power to take charge. So parents, support your young adults in their quest to kind of find their ideal. Don't push your ideal onto your kids. They are individuals and are discovering what works best for them. So approach it from curiosity, ask them questions, help guide them to finding their own answers. They're going to have their own special interests and needs beyond being busy, and you want to have those too. Kids, encourage your parents to find their scrapbooking or find their hanging out with their girlfriends or find their, going to play golf with their friends. Help them find their thing. Encourage them to unplug from you and go find their thing, because eventually you're going to move out of the house and you're going to be leading your own life out there. And trust me, you want your parents to have a life that they are living back at home. So that is a good, healthy dynamic to foster. And young adults play a role in that too, for sure. So trust yourself. Um, you know, trust us. Spend the time and intentionality in figuring out how to not live in that survival mode, but shift into thrive instead. So I want to close this out for us, Kate.
For sure. Well, everyone, that's a great another wrap up episode of Raising Bigs. Thank you guys all for listening. We hope you found some takeaways, some fresh perspective, and action steps or two in this episode that will help you kind of take a step back, figure out what balance works for you. And again, just recognizing the importance that it's different for everyone. Just because it works for someone else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And also to give yourself grace and allowing you to kind of maybe load your plate up too much and realize, okay, I can't do this, and maybe not sign up for enough and then realize, no, I want more to do. So give yourself grace, give yourself room to grow, and give yourself that ability to be able to find a plan that works for you. But above it all, we hope that it opens an opportunity for conversation between children and their parents, and conversations with yourself too, and figuring out what works for you. Talk with your friends about it, whether you're a child or a parent, and just have those conversations. We're definitely not experts on this whole parenting thing and on this child thing. It's both of our first times on this planet, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little easier for those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Please subscribe and share with those in your circle who might benefit from hearing it, whether it's kids, parents, future parents, young adults, whatever. I think that, just the topics themselves are great listening points. A new episode comes out every Monday.
So you can visit my life coaching website at marcyhawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarcy@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook at Life Coach Marcy or Instagram at life_coach_Marcy. Where can they find you, Cade?
My handle across all social medias is DK Berrigan. That is Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, everything. The best way to contact us or give us feedback, ask any questions, or recommend any topics is to DM either one of us on social medias. We're always open and checking those if you guys have anything going on. Or you can also reach out via the contact me page on my mom's website, which again is marcyhawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback, topic ideas, questions, or comments that you guys would like to share. And with that being said, we will see you next time on Raising Bigs.
Thank you, Cade. Love you.
Love you too, Mom.